Hello. We're going to be talking about web architecture today, or at least the beginnings of web architecture. Some items that we'll be covering in this lecture is we want to go beyond the router and setting up actions in the router. The router's job really is to just send traffic request over to a controller which handles it more appropriately, not handle all database and template interactions within the router. The router is just to take that URL request and send it somewhere else. So we need to get beyond that. That won't scale as far as our code, as it grows and gets more complicated. We have better things to do that, and that's where we need to go next. So our routes are good at structuring those requests though. So we're going to be creating what are called resourceful routes, and that will help generate and set up very nicely these resources is what they're called. So the ability for us to set up controllers and actions that can handle the create, read, update, delete actions that we'll be taking. And so today we'll be looking at the index action and the show and see how to set that up in a resourceful way. We'll also be looking at how to set up what's called a layout template. So if we have any shared JavaScript style sheets or markup that structures how our pages are laid out, we want to be able to share that within a layout template. And then we're also going to, you'll see, as we walk through these demos that they're a little bit plain and black and white with no formatting at all. So we're going to give our user interface a little freshening up and use a Css Framework to help us with that. So that's where we're going to go today. And so first thing I will do is jump over to where we're at in this application. So right now I have a list of friends coming from our database, and in our data, our code to generate this. Let's just do a review of that as well. So we have a route in our router that routes anything that /friends. What we'll do is we'll pull all the friends from our database, and then we'll send that over to the friends template, and from this variable in the template we have this collection of friends that we loaded from our database. So again, let's look over at our friend model, which nothing too exciting in here as of now. Remember, we have this class that inherits from the Eloquent model, which handles all the database interactions for us. And then if we want to mass assign or update, we can control that with this fillable variable. And then in our template, we have our friends in a big header, and then we iterate over this. All the friends, we're going to iterate one friend at a time, and I'm just printing the first name right now. One thing to make a note of I thought was a little bit helpful is that there is a SQLite extension that allows us to view the data that's in our SQLite database. So if I search for SQLite, there's this SQLite extension here that you can install. And then if you install that, you can, let me close that. If you install that, you can hit Command or Control P depending on what platform you're on. Hit create the arrow, and then you can type in SQLite open database, and it'll actually look within your project to see if you have a SQLite file, which was super handy. So it found my database.sqlite, and then I select it, and then make sure I did that right. So open database. Make sure I choose the right one. And maybe it's over, oh yeah, it's down to the side, sorry. It's down here on the left side, so I'd open my File Explorer, and notice it has my friend's database right here. And I'm going to show the table. And notice it shows me the items, and actually the SQL command too to run that, which is helpful. Select all from friends. I have Jane, John, Jack, Martin, which all, if I go back to the browser, matches exactly the data that I'm accessing. So that's a nice little handy thing if you don't want to jump out to the SQLite console, or if you don't want to jump over into Tinker and do an all from there. So I think that's handy. We may pull it up from time to time. Okay, so there's that. And so the next thing I want to talk about is I want to convert, like I mentioned in my outline, I want to get beyond the router part. So we don't want to be doing these database and template calls, and sometimes these can get complicated. I want to remove that complication from this web.php and into its own control, what's called a controller, which handles this kind of stuff for you really well. And so I'm going to show you a command that's going to generate a controller for us. And so the way that looks is we run the, we should be getting a little bit more familiar with this PHP artisan, because that's pretty much how we get these commands going and running. And if I just do artisan by itself, you get a long list of things that we can run, and we'll be exposing and using more and more of these as we progress through the quarter. But what we're going to be using this time is we're going to be making a controller. There you go. And so let's go ahead and run that command. PHP artisan make controller, and I'm going to be calling it friend controller. And I want this to be a resource, and I'll tell you why in a second. Because a friend controller without a resource is just going to be basically a blank slate. But if I do the -- resource on that, it's going to give me a template with all my CRUD actions that basically set up the template for me to fill in. So it'll give me index, show, store, delete. It'll give me those things that correspond with our database actions. So that'll be really handy there. So I'm going to go ahead and generate the controller. So controller generated or created successfully. Let me show you what that did. So let me go back to the code. And if I go up to my app HTTP controller, it created right here this controller file and stubbed out all the actions for me. So I have this index, and it gives you a little comment, display a listing of the resource. So the resource in our case is a friend. All right, and I think I've also called that an entity, but in model view controller resourceful routing terminology, it's called a resource. So a friend is our resource in this case. So we have index, which shows a listing, create, store, show, edit, update, and destroy. So like I said, today we'll be using setting up index and show. So what I want to do is I want to convert the use of this route to actually use our controller instead. So before I do that, what I do want to show you, and we'll refer to this as well, is I need to go inside of here, and I need to have Laravel create some resourceful routes, what are called resourceful routes for me. And so that looks like this. So route and resource friends. And I'll be using the friend controller for that. Like that. All right, and so you're like, okay, that is interesting. What's going on? Where's the magic? All right, well, let me show you real quick in the what that did for us. So if I type in PHP artisan route list, okay, notice I have all these friend, actually you're right, starting up here, these friend routes, they're just Laravel recognized and these routes for us, and they'll be available to us in our application, and you'll see why that's important every step of the way. So friends is what we designated in that first key, and then friends controller is what we designated in that second string. And so notice it maps this friends URI to the index action in the controller. It maps post, which is a create, to the store action in our controller. So notice it maps these methods, which we've talked about in other lectures about HTTP. So we have get, we have post, we have put, and we have delete. So those are those HTTP verbs that map to our controller actions. And so now this is actually it living and breathing within an application, which is totally cool. So there's that. We'll come back and look at this again, because we're also going to reference these names as well, just so we can interact with those on our web pages when we link to different places in our app. Okay, cool. So we'll come back to that. I just wanted to make a note there of what this resource, basically a declaration within our web.php, what that does. Okay, cool. So now, next thing I want to do, I want to convert this over to using our controller. So I'm actually going to comment this out. So if I go back to my browser and hit refresh, boom, nothing happens, right? So we want to get this working again, but using our controller. So let's go back to our controller. And since this is a listing of our resource, we want to use index. And so from our index, we want to, again, look up our friends. Grab all of our friends. And then from here, we're going to follow a similar pattern. We're going to do view and then friends index. Okay, so where does this friends index come from? Well, again, if you go back to our resourceful routes, friends index is the name. All right, that's how we're basically defining our controller actions and our template access. So it's just going to be, it's a convention that Laravel uses, and if we follow the convention, our lives will be easier. If we try to deviate from that convention, we'll have to do some weird workarounds to get it to work. So it's easier to follow the conventions. So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to load that template, and we're going to make this template aware of our database records, like that. And so the next thing I need to do is go down to our views, and I'm going to create a new folder called friends, and then in there I'm going to create a new file called index. All right, so again, let me connect everything together. So we created a resourceful route, which gave us this here, which says what action do you use? for which URI, and then how do we reference that in our code. And so then I go here and I want to reference that friends.index, which says go to your views, and under the friends directory there's a file called index.blade.php, and then send this data along over to that index. So that's how it's all connected, but it's a convention that's really going to help us down the road. So let's jump over into our index file. And actually I can probably just copy this from our friends.blade over to our index file. Save that. And let's go see if this worked. So if I hit refresh, it worked. So basically I just converted this route here, which we don't need anymore, to using a resourceful route, which says go to your friend controller, pull up index, and then load that over into your index file, and then that works. Awesome. So I could make a change here if I wanted to, right? Save that. There you go. Cool. So that, again, just proof that that's working. Oops. I just don't want that in there. Okay, so that's looking good. I think the next thing I wanted to show you is we want to get the show page to working. So let's, in fact, I'm gonna just to show again this we don't need friends anymore, this friends template anymore either. So I'm gonna delete that. Because now we're just using this stuff, friends, index, and what I want to do next is I want to create a new file. And this one's going to be called show. All right. Show friend detail. Maybe I'll stick that inside of a header too. Okay. All right, so for the show, what's interesting here is that in our controller, here it is, show, there's this ID thing, okay? And show, remember, if we look at our data, every record has an ID, has a unique ID. So Jane's unique ID is 2, John is 3, Jack is 4, Martin is 5. The number on the far left is something that the SQLite extension throws in there, so that's something you can ignore. So it's the fields here that are most important. So ID is what I'm referencing here when I'm talking about the unique numbers. So Jane's unique ID is 2, etc. So we can use that to our advantage. Whenever we want to reference like Jack Doe, we want to reference by ID, which is 4. Whenever we want to reference Martin Smith, we want to reference that record by its unique ID, which is 5, and so on. So that's really important. So when we reference the ID over in show, it needs you to pass in an ID so that it knows what to look up in the database table. So with that information, we can now do a lookup. So we'll look up a friend by ID, and that is like this. So we can look up that friend by ID, and then we just pass that along to the view. Friends.show by convention. We'll give that friend a key, and then the value is actually that friend variable, like that. So we'll pass that friend over to the show template, and we're not using it yet, but if I pull that up here, I can now display that friend information here. So let's see, I'll throw that into that. And remember, we created that variable friend, first name. All right. So that, if I go over here, and we know we have Martin, which is I think 5. Yep, show friend detail Martin. And 4 should be Jack. 3, John. So notice, just by using our resourceful URIs, our resourceful routing, our resourceful controller using show with a show template, things just work. And it ties it all together, which is pretty cool. But okay, that's great. I hard coded that up in the browser, but if I'm over here, I want to link from here to there. So let's go ahead and set that up as well. So let's go back to each friend and set up a route so that if you click on the name, it'll send them to their detail page. So over here in this anchor tag with an href, the href is basically the link, the route link to a resource. So we want to just give it the right thing here, and it needs to be dynamic, right? Because we're iterating over friends, and so we want to put in dynamic content right here. So I'm going to use this helper built into Laravel called route. Okay, and what that route expects you to do, expects that expects you to give it. Okay, what template do you want? Where do you want it to go? Well, we're going to go to friends.show, which is that convention we're following in our routing, and then we just need to give it the ID, right? So friend ID. And so the friend ID will generate the correct thing for you. All right. So let me refresh the page. And notice they all turn to links. And as I mouse over them, you'll see at the bottom status bar, each has their own page. See that? Now let me show you what the HTML looks like. So HTML looks like this. So we have our H1 friends, our UL, and each of these are within an LI, and the URL gets dynamically updated to be friends 2, 3, 4, 5. So that just inserted the ID of those records so that it knows when we click on one of those to display the detail for that particular friend. So that's pretty cool. Awesome, awesome. All right, so we have that going. When we're here, it'd be nice to maybe have a link back to the listings page. So let's do that. Might as well make it a little bit more full-fledged here. So we can have a href back to all friends, and so we can just use that mustache, they look like little mustaches, and use our little route helper, And we want to go basically just go back to the friends.index. And if I hit refresh, link for all friends sends us back here. And they all have that. Cool. So that gives you an idea how the routing works. And if I view source here, there's that route. Just sends us back to /friends, which is the URI to go there. Awesome. Okay, so we have this functioning. It's loading using our controller. We're using resourceful routes everywhere now. We want to make this look a little more pretty, I guess. Notice, you know, we want to stick this in some sort of layout template. So both of these are actually going to come in together, because if we want all the pages to use the same look and feel, we want them to also share the same layout as well. So we're going to kind of kill two birds with one stone. And so let me go ahead and get this layout thing going first, and then we'll add some markup or some CSS to it. All right, so the way layouts work is that over here in our views, right, I can create a new file and call it layout, like that. And in our layout, we want to make sure I get everything typed in right. This is just an HTML template that you commonly see. So HTML, and then head and title, friends. And what we want to do in here is there's this special command in Laravel. So now we're getting very Laravel specific. And we want our content to dynamically load right here in this spot. So you'll see where this gets applied in a second. And over now in our index page and our show, right? We want to use, let's see, extends. We want to use the layout, and then we want this section to be loaded in the content section of the layout. So let me follow this same pattern over in the show. And end section. So notice extends layout section content. So if I go back to our layout file, layout is the name of the file. So we're going to extend this. And then we're going to yield the content of whatever file is in here, or that's referencing this layout. It's going to go right here. So let me put something shared up here. Which one? Friends app. And let me change these to 3s because I don't want those so big. All right, so if that's the case, our layout's going to have a Friends app title on every page with the index or the show content in there. So let's go back to our browser. I'm going to hit refresh. And so remember, this is from the layout, and this is from index. And so it basically injected the friends index into the layout. And so if I view source here, right, this stuff out here was in the layout, and then this in here was inside index, the index file. And if I go to the show, notice it has the same header. And if I view source on that, this is from the layout, and then everything down here is from the show. So why is that powerful? Well, it's going to allow our pages to have a consistent look and feel as our app grows and grows. You'll add pieces and sections. You'll add header bars, footer bars, sidebars, and we want to be able to construct our pages into these components so they can be kind of dedicated layouts to different things that have different purposes. So this is just the beginnings of getting that working, and so that'll be cool. And so we'll be using those more and more as well. All right, so the last thing we're going to do is we want to get this looking a little nicer. So we're going to use a CSS framework. Now, again, as a web developer, you have a list of CSS frameworks out there. There's probably, I was going to say there are dozens for sure, but there maybe even be hundreds. So there's a lot of them out there. So for the purposes of this class, I picked one that I thought was pretty straightforward and easy to use. That was kind of important for me to do that. And also, so it may not be the most popular one, but it's pretty approachable. And these CSS frameworks are pretty easy to plug and take out. So if there's another one that you happen to like, you're more than welcome to use it. I picked this one called Spectre. And it gives us some nice elements. It formats things for us, right? Makes our buttons look nice, makes our forms look a little bit more professional, right? What else? Allows us to lay out our pages nicely. Has some other components, badges, accordions, breadcrumbs, things that you typically see on a web page. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this installed manually. So I'm just going to grab these links straight from the CDN and just throw those into our page. And I'm going to do that up here in the layout, because then remember the layout's shared between my index and my show. I don't want to have to copy them to each template. So this is another good example. So just by doing this, bringing those styles in, and I refresh my page, right? I already get like a new look, like a very cleaner font, cleaner, kind of cleaner layout. Things just look a little nicer. And so let me do a couple other things to get this looking good too. Also in our layout, I want to stick this in a container so that it'll look nice. Things will be a little bit more, have a better padding and border around. So I'm going to stick class container, which is what we get from Spectre. And so that should give us a little bit more cushion around it. And then lastly, what else I want to get that's right, I want to get this, instead of in a bulleted list, I wanted to get it into a table. So I'm going to change this to table and give it table striped. And table, support this table hover. And like I said, I'm just getting this from the documentation, so let me show you what that So we have tables, and so I want it to look like this. So I'm just grabbing this code here. In fact, yeah, I might be able to just get a lot of this going here. And we're going to have first, this will allow us to get access to our other attributes of our records. And I don't want this on there, I don't think. And first name, last name. Oh yeah, I do want like another column, which will actually link here. We'll use that to link over to the details. So there's that. Oh, I need to wrap the for each. Each row will be each row will represent one friend. Okay, so I think that looks good. So yeah, we're gonna iterate over each friend, and then each friend we want to display their first name, last name, age, and a link to their detail page. All right, let's go see what that looks like. Okay, beautiful, awesome. So let's see if the links work. That looks good. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about right there. And awesome, awesome. So we just incorporated the CSS framework in there now. So from here on out, we should be able to make decently looking pages now, just by leveraging that framework. So I guess in closing, we basically took out our route get and created a resourceful route instead, so that we can display a list of friends and show detail of a friend. We organized our HTML into layouts so that we can share CSS and headings and that. And then we introduced a CSS framework to make our pages look a little bit nicer. So that's it for now. We will be getting into other actions. So we need to be able to create, update, and delete our friends as well. So that's where we'll be going next. So until then, have a good one.